Hello, hello. I'm Elizabeth Busby, the Director of Programs for the Theology of the Body Institute. Today we're talking about a topic that is way harder than most of my typical videos, and it's when your boyfriend or girlfriend struggles with pornography. I want to start by saying, I'm assuming if you clicked on this video that this is something that is near and dear to your heart, and I just want to start by saying how heartbroken I am for you. This is a really hard thing, and it is also a really prevalent thing. In my work as a marriage counselor, in my studies, my preparation for this career, etc., I am shocked, not surprised, but shocked by how prevalent pornography is in relationships. And I think there's this idea that it just goes away at a certain point in your life. But honestly, research shows, reality shows, etc., that the way that the brain responds to pornography, it is not a very easy thing to break. It's possible, but it's not something that's just like gonna happen. And so there are a lot of people who struggle with pornography. There are a lot of people whose relationships have pornography as a part of it in some capacity. And so it's an important thing to be talking about. And it's also important to give yourself permission to just grieve the reality, right? That this is something you're ensnared in, or this is something that your partner's ensnared in, someone you love, you're discerning marriage with. I think it's really important to just bring that pain to the Lord. And that is honestly the first thing that I want to say to you. If this is a conversation you just had recently with your significant other and they told you that you struggle with pornography, or if you're the one struggling with pornography and you're trying to figure out how to bring this up to your significant other, the first thing I want to tell you to do is bring it to Jesus first. I want you to go to adoration, and I want you to open your heart to him. And you probably have done it multiple times in the past. If you're the one struggling with pornography, there's been cries out to the Lord for help. But I just want you to give that to the Lord in this space, right? To say, I love you, and I know you love me, and I know that I have a dignity, and I know that you honor and uphold my dignity, and you're fighting for me, and you love me, and I'm sad, and I'm hurting that this is my reality, right? I just want you to be in that space with the Lord, because he is the one who is so merciful and is going to meet you right there and love you right there in that space. And from that relationship with Christ, you can then go and have these really hard but very necessary conversations with your significant other. So that's number one. Feel free to pause the video and go do that and come back. It's so important to have Christ in this conversation and in your heart at the forefront of your mind when you're talking about this stuff. The second thing I want to say is I think there's a very important posture that couples need to have toward each other when they're talking about really hard stuff. For some couples, pornography, sexual history, sexual brokenness is going to be the hardest thing you have to talk about. For others, that's not the case. But regardless of where you are, when you're talking about really hard things, it's important to have the posture that I'm about to describe. So when you read the book of Exodus and you see that moment when Moses encounters God in the burning bush, God says something really powerful that I think is very applicable for couples. You're probably like, where is she going with this? But there's something very powerful that God says. He says, Moses, remove your shoes because the place where you're standing is holy ground. That's the posture that I want you to have towards your significant other when they have something deep and intimate and vulnerable with their heart to share with you. I want you to kind of emotionally remove your shoes, right? When you walk into that space with them, when you enter into that conversation with them, I want you to have reverence for how sacred a space it is that the two of you are creating when you're having these deep conversations. Because it's very easy to get angry, it's very easy to get resentful, it's very easy to get blamey. On the other end, it's very easy to just be mired in shame and guilt. And so I think if you don't have this posture of reverence, and it's not this safe space that you guys have created to talk about this stuff, you're going to be like a bull in the china shop, and you're just going to end up hurting each other even worse. And it's the kind of thing that could end a relationship if you're not careful, right? Because the pain that you could inflict on each other could just be too much. So I think it's really important to have this posture of reverence, right? Remove your shoes because the place where you're standing is holy ground. Now, the next thing I want to say about this, when these sorts of topics should be addressed in a relationship. First of all, the big hard stop is before you get married. not only is it super rude to not disclose something like this to, like, so say you're the person who struggles with pornography and you're just so scared to bring it up to them and you're terrified they're going to break up with you, etc. So you just don't say anything. It's super rude to wait until after you're married because it's like tricking them into the relationship. But there's also kind of what we call canonical ramifications. So there are requirements for marriage in canon law. And one of them is that you're free, right? You're free to say yes to the person. And if you haven't disclosed to your partner something huge like this, then that person has not given their free yes to accepting that cross in their marriage, to saying yes to walking with that journey, right? To saying, there's going to be this big heavy thing in my relationship, right? My partner's struggling with pornography, the way that that's going to affect me, them, our sexual relationship. They haven't gotten to say yes to that. And so their freedom is restricted. You're robbing them of this opportunity to freely give their yes. So you must disclose it before you guys get married. Now, if you wait until you're engaged, there's a very real likelihood that you're going to need to postpone your engagement or call off the wedding entirely. There are very, very holy and brave couples out there who do that, but that is a hard thing to do, as I'm sure you can appreciate. You've already sent out save the dates. You've already put tens of thousands of dollars, maybe. If you're that kind of person who wants a big reception, you put tens of thousands of dollars down on deposits, and the risk of losing all of that, the risk of the shame or embarrassment or whatever of breaking the engagement, that could be enough to kind of propel people forward even when they're not comfortable with it. So I never recommend waiting until engagement to disclose something like this because it makes it very difficult to continue discerning in the relationship. I think that if you have something like this to tell the other person, you should tell them as soon as possible, but with appropriate boundaries, right? So if you disclose that pornography is something, and masturbation presumably is something that you're struggling with early on in the relationship, that doesn't mean that you need to then give them all the details, right? It would just be saying, this is something that I'm struggling with and I'm working on it and we can revisit it later. But giving them the knowledge that this is happening and this is something that you're struggling with, etc., and having that be just something that is said, right? Something that's not a secret, that's not something you have to be ashamed about in the corner. It's just something that you're going through and you're struggling with and you're working on. I think that is appropriate and healthy. But of course, this leads to the next question, right? How to navigate that conversation whenever you do have it. When one or both people share they're struggling in that area or they have deep wounds in that area. I want to remind you of the posture of reverence, right? Make sure that when you have that conversation, you've removed your shoes. You don't have to actually take them off, or you can, but just make sure that emotionally you've removed your shoes and you're recognizing that you're in this space of reverence in the other person's heart in this really deep and intimate and vulnerable area. But I think it's important to also remember, once you have that posture down, that boundaries are really important. There are very few, if any, instances where I think it's appropriate for your significant other to also be your accountability partner. When you're going through pornography and masturbation recovery, it's important to have someone that can hold you accountable. And I almost never recommend that person is your significant other, because your significant other is hurt by those things every time you do them. Say you're working through a pornography struggle and then you fall and you look at pornography. To have to then immediately tell your significant other that you just fell will also hurt them and will make your pain even that much worse. So I don't think that dynamic is a healthy one. And I think having those boundaries is important. My work as a therapist has taught me how sensitive these areas are and how much professional help can really benefit. So I think that as you're navigating these conversations, recognizing what the appropriate boundaries are, it's also very helpful for the people who are struggling with them, one or both of you, to be seeing a therapist and have professional help to work through all of that, right? So you're not putting kind of the burden, if you will, of helping heal you on your significant other. You already have that need met. And then your conversations about it can be about how it affects your physical intimacy. What physical intimacy boundaries do we need to have? Do we need to have more firm physical intimacy boundaries because it could trigger, your arousal, and that could trigger pornography or masturbation, etc. So first of all, having the appropriate posture, right, of reverence, making sure your boundaries are appropriate, making sure that you are meeting your emotional needs, working through it with a therapist or another kind of professional to help you. And then making sure that the conversations that you do have about them are more about how it affects your relationship. There's a list of therapists on catholictherapist.com, and I highly recommend that you look for someone there, because I imagine there are going to be people who watch this who are interested in finding a therapist. So catholictherapist.com is a great place to start looking for a therapist that's faithful to the church, faithful to the magisterium, that can help you navigate all of this. If this was helpful to you, please like and subscribe and know of my prayers for you, and I'll see you next time.